obviously it's not all the same because, I mean, we're talking about a huge, range of people, but I think one of the things that was pretty consistent is they have a food called fufu or bugali in some places, and it's basically a really finely ground meal of, it could be a number of things. It could be like dried plantain or cassava roots, or I think because it was the cheapest, the most common one was just corn, really finely ground corn, and they just boil it and boil water and put it in there, and it makes sort of like a sticky mush. And then they usually have a a certain kind of leaf called a cassava leaf with it, and also some sort of meat that's been boiled in like a tomato sauce, and it's really good. It's really delicious. So that's kind of the food. They eat a lot of. They really don't like sugar. In fact, they like to make fun of Americans for it. But they eat a lot of very salty food, lots of fish.
I had a couple of, I was introduced to a couple of foods a couple of dishes that I wasn't, that I didn't have it back home. And some of them, one of them is the pap that I talked about. And that is made from a corn or a maize, maize flour, and then mix it with hot water, stir it on fire, and then you will know when it's ready, okay? And then you eat with gravy or stew and with chicken, okay? I had enough chicken that I think I should be given a break for eating chicken now. I had enough on mission, and because that's what the people like most. So that's you may be giving pap and chicken like 7 times a week, every other house that you go. And but my favorite was this food called ngushu. So that is made from something beans, and mix put some meals in them and mix it as in their language they say, So I love that a lot. That was my favorite. Those who, used to serve me know that I love ngushu. And the worst thing that I had was amasi. It's kind of a flour, mixed with sour milk. That was one of the times in my life that I wasn't honest, because I pretended as if I loved it, and I wanted to throw up when I went back to the flat. It was, I'm sorry, it was kind of gross. I didn't like it that much, and since then, if you offer me and I don't want to disappoint you, I will just tell you I'm fasting. I'm not going to take it in. So, but beside that, South Africans have rich culture with food, and they like meat a lot. I come from a background where we don't eat meat a lot. We eat fish, in Ghana, because Ghana is on the coast. But I had a lot of meat. They eat meat a lot. They can, smoke meat. They call it braai. They can braai it just on the fire, put meat on the fire, and just eat with a drink or something. So, and their food is also kind of, they have a mixed culture over there, as I've said, because we have Western people over there. It's not typically all Africans, Western people. We even have Africans that are English Africans, but we have white Africans over there. We have black Africans over there. So it's kind of mixed. So it depends on the house that you go. The house you enter, the food you get depend on where you enter. So if you end up being in the White House, you get fed with American food. Mm-hmm. And you end up being with black Africans, you end up with, being fed with, pap, chicken, ngushu, and some other food. And they have this sausage called Vros. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right. That vros, it's kind of it's like a sausage, but kind of delicious. I loved it. So that's what I remember about the food over there. Now you making me miss home.
The food I ate the most in South Africa was pap and chicken. So pap is just maize meal, cornmeal, cooked and boiled, and it's kind of like it looks like mashed potatoes, but it's harder, and so it fills your stomach up, but it's not necessarily very nutritious. So they eat a lot of pap, and then they eat chicken with it, and maybe some sauce and beans or whatnot. So that's what I ate probably almost every day of my mission. I had pap and chicken. You'll get some unique stuff as well, especially in the African areas. When I say African, that's the black areas. So in the black areas, black culture, you might get a little... I loved cowhead. Loved it. There's one area where I'd buy cowhead on the street. I don't know if I was supposed to, but I loved cowhead. The meat was so good, especially on like the back of the head. Probably the most unique thing I ate was cow intestine. They call it muhodu, and it's kind of a delicacy in their culture. And so it's probably the most unique thing and thing I was not used to, I guess. But they love it, and it can be good. And then you'll eat, like, I had chicken neck and just a variety of food. One thing I noticed as far as food goes is that you eat everything. So for example, with chicken, you don't just eat the meat off of the bone, but you get down to, eating kind of the tendons and what connects the chicken to the bone. And in their culture, they even get down, the kids will like chew on the bone and suck the marrow out of the bone, so they get everything they can out of it. So when I came home from my mission, I could not believe, like, when my family ate chicken and they left so much meat and stuff on the bone. It kind of frustrated me. But now I'm back to used to American culture. Another food that was common there is wors, boerewors, more common in the white areas, but people in the black areas eat it as well. It's kind of like a sausage. Comes from German culture, I believe, European culture. As far as dessert goes, they don't eat a lot of sweet things, so everything's kind of plain. But I'm trying to think of the name of this pudding that was common, especially in the white areas. And they had a milk tart was a dessert.
A common dish there among Afrikaans individuals, as well as those with a darker complexion in the townships, they love to eat pap, which is, anybody that's eaten in the South would recognize grits, and pap is kind of like grits, but instead of using yellow corn to make it, it's used with white corn, and it's kind of tasteless, almost looks like mashed potatoes. And sometimes they serve it with a gravy, sometimes it's just kind of the pap and some sausage. And that's a really common dish. Some of the foods that were interesting, I've eaten chicken feet. I ate mahodu, which is cow intestines. On one instance, I ate goat head, which was interesting. It was literally, a head there. It was cooked, luckily, and it was cut right down the center. And so you would basically take the part of the head that you wanted and, dish up. So they'd peel off the skin and eat it. So I had brains and eye and tongue and cheek. It was good. Good experience. Other interesting foods. That's probably the most of it. The mahodu, one thing I could say about it, smelled terrible when it was cooking. There were many times we'd walk into a house and we'd walk through the kitchen and the smell was so bad it would just about gag you. Like I almost threw up several times, and the room would just be full of flies. But the people loved it. It was great. Wasn't so bad after it was cooked. So it was good.
Food in Africa is rice. Rice is life, and I think that in a lot of countries in the world it probably is, but in it's no different in West Africa. Rice is life. Rice is cheap. It has the nutrients that they need, and they have, of course, their own local ways of preparing it. And in Sierra Leone and Liberia, they have slightly differing recipes, but particularly in Sierra Leone, well, okay, no, in Liberia as well, they put on top of the rice, they prepare rice, they boil up the rice, prepare it, and then they put what is called plaças on top of it. Now, plaças, the best way that it was described to me by an American companion is plant sauce. Plaças is like plant sauce. And pretty much it means any type of plant that they have. What they'll do is they'll get a plant, some usually leaves of some sort, and they'll grip them in their hand, and then they'll use a knife and they'll kind of cut off the very top, and then they'll inch it up a little bit, cut off the very top again, and inch it up a little bit. So they'll just have this bunch of leaves, and it ends up looking kind of like if you were to take lettuce and throw it in a blender. It would just chop it up into a million little pieces. That's kind of what it ends up looking like. And they put that in a pot. They put tons of oil into it, a few different spices. There's a spice there that is really common called Maggi. It's like a kind of a bouillon kind of a spice. And they throw a bunch of that in and a whole bunch of oil, boil it up, and so and then it ends up becoming this sauce kind of a thing. This kind of the consistency of it would be, it's a very unique consistency, and it just goes right on top of the rice. The oil drips all down into the rice. The common oil there is palm oil, because there's a lot of palm trees there, and so they use lots and lots and lots of palm oil. And they put palm oil in this plaças, put it on the rice, and then you just eat it, just like that. And there are different plants that they will use. They'll use, a common one in Sierra Leone is cassava leaf. So if you don't know what cassava is, you can look it up on the internet. But it's a plant that's grown in tropical climates, and the plant basically is like I think it's like a tuber, kind of like a potato. But it's long and thin, grows underground. But what they'll do in Sierra Leone is they'll cut the leaves off of it when it's just a really young plant. When it just has sprouted, they'll start harvesting the leaves off of it, and they'll use them. They'll cut them up, like I said, and put them in this plaças, which they'll put on their rice. They also use some sweet potato leaves. They have local species of sweet potatoes that they'll do the same thing. When the plant is young, they'll cut off the leaves and they'll put it in they'll make it into a plaças and put it on their rice. But some other common foods, and again, it's just more things that they put on their rice. Rice is the thing that they eat, but some other common things that they put on it is seafood. Because both Sierra Leone and Liberia are right next to the ocean, and so fishermen will go out into the ocean and they'll catch fish, and so the fish is a pretty cheap meat, and so they'll get fish and they'll cook the fish. They'll either fry the fish, or I think sometimes they might boil it, but a lot of the time is fried, and they'll just throw the entire fish in there though. They won't like, oh, I'm going to fillet this fish and pull all the bones out. No, they just throw the whole fish in there, and you get to deal with the bones, which was probably my least favorite part about the food, is just having to deal with these fish bones that were in my food. Other common foods is, they have other things too. There's some crab that they'll sometimes throw in it, little tiny crabs, or really small shellfish that are there. In Liberia, there's a dish called palm butter. It's a palm butter, but and it's taken from palm nuts. They'll take palm nuts and they'll beat them in a giant mortar and pestle. That's one of the most common things that they use for cooking. Like a mortar and pestle that you'd think of that you can grind spices with, just times that by like 20. And it's this big, huge wooden thing with a big rod that they'll put whatever it is they want to smush and what they want to mash up in it, and then they'll beat it and turn it into a mush or a powder or something like that. But they'll process a lot of their foods with that, and They'll do sometimes leaves, like instead of cutting them, sometimes they'll beat them. But anyway, in Liberia, they'll do that with the palm nuts, and they end up getting like a oily, buttery kind of thing, and they'll put that on top of their rice, and that's actually pretty good. My favorite African dish, though, is fufu. Now, if I were to describe fufu to you, it's kind of like a dough. It's like a dough that is put in a bowl, and then a soup is poured over it. One of the few dishes that actually doesn't have rice in it is fufu. And it's different depending on the country that it's made in. In Sierra Leone, they'll make it using just cassava. Just solely cassava, and they'll boil up the cassava so that it's nice. Cassava is like this tuber kind of a plant that grows underground. So they'll boil it up kind of like you would boil potatoes, and then make it soft, and they'll just smash it up in their mortar and pestle, and knead it, and it ends up becoming kind of like a dough. And then, like I said, they'll put soup on it, and the way you eat it is you just grab a ball of the dough and kind of dip it in the soup, or you get some, if they have some fish in there, get some fish meat on it and stick it in your mouth and swallow it down. It's the hardest thing to get over not chewing, because you don't chew. It would be pointless to chew. You just swallow it down. That's the way you eat it. In Ghana, they make it differently. And I had a lot of Ghanaian companions. That's how I got introduced to Ghanaian fufu. But in Ghana, they'll make it with cassava and plantain. They'll do the same exact thing. They'll boil up plantains and boil up cassavas and mix the two. And it ends up making the dough a little bit firmer. And that's actually my favorite, is the Ghanaian fufu. That I could eat that all day. And there's a soup that they like to put with it called groundnut soup. And groundnut is ground nut, and ground nuts is what they call peanuts. I guess probably because they grow on the ground, but they call peanuts ground nuts. And so they'll make a sauce using a lot of peanuts, and so it's a kind of a peanutty soup that they'll use it. They'll sometimes eat it with rice, but a lot of time it's eaten with fufu, and that's my favorite dish. I could eat that like crazy. And like I said, at first, when you're getting used to the consistency of this food, it's different. It's different than anything I've ever had in America. But it's really good. After, I think most missionaries that eat it come to really like it. The first time it's like this, wow, interesting, but it quickly grows on you, and you end up really enjoying it. I think as far as most missionaries anyway. Let me think, other foods. Another part of the best part about food in Sierra Leone is the fruit. Boy, they've got fruit that we don't even have here, and they have so much of it, and it's so good. Mangoes are the first thing that come to mind. They have fresh mangoes during mango season. Just a month or so, or a couple months out of the year is when the mangoes start to ripen. And in Sierra Leone and Liberia, mango trees are like, in America we have maple and oak. They just have mangoes. Like, everyone has a mango tree in their yard. Mango trees are all over the mountains. Mango trees are all over the sides of the road. And so mangoes, during mango season, the whole entire country just gets covered in mangoes. And they're you get them straight off of the tree, and they're fresh and they're ripe, and it's unlike it's hard to find mangoes in a supermarket here in the United States that taste that good, that are that fresh and that ripe. Missionaries like to indulge on mangoes a little bit during mango season, but it's fantastic. Another thing is coconut. Coconut is one thing that's available all year round. That's one thing that doesn't seem to really have a season. And what they'll do with coconut is they'll pull it straight off the tree, usually when it's pretty young, and it doesn't actually have a hard shell on it, like you would think of coconut here in the store. It doesn't have a hard shell on it. It just has like a green husk, and inside the green husk is milk. And if the coconut is picked early enough, then the meat inside the coconut that normally you would think of as being hard is not. It's kind of like a jelly kind of thing, and I think it tastes way better than hard coconut personally. But they'll sell it on the street. They'll get wheelbarrows, and they'll fill the wheelbarrow full of coconut, and they'll walk around the street, and you can buy them for very, very cheap and enjoy fresh coconut milk as you're out walking around. They call it coconut water, but whatever. And But that's delicious as well. They have bananas all year round, and they have pineapple all year round. They also grow a couple other things. I mean, they have cucumbers. They have some native fruits that you don't see as much around here. One called soursop, S-O-U-R-S-O-P. You can look it up. It's a pretty good fruit. One that they call monkey apples. I have yet to translate that into what the real name for it is. They have star fruit. In Sierra Leone, they call it five-finger apple because it's a fruit that's shaped kind of like a star. Like if you were to cut it in half, it would be a star on the inside, and it tastes very similar to an apple. That's really good. But as far as a lot of the other vegetables that we have that grow that we can get in the supermarket, not a ton. You can find occasionally. You can find carrots. Maybe you can find potatoes. You can find sweet potatoes there very commonly. Sweet potatoes is way more common than just a normal, like a russet potato that you would find in the store here. But the sweet potatoes there are really good. It's a different species of sweet potato that's kind of purplish on the inside. So good. A lot of people will fry them up and sell them on the side of the road. Kind of like, not quite like potato chips, but more just like French fries. Kind of like French fries, but they just cut them up into chunks, fry them, sell them on the side of the street. And some of the food that's sold on the side of the streets there. Sure. They of course, they'll warn you about food that is sold on the streets because, they don't really have an agency that makes them handle food properly or anything like that. So it's not always the best idea to eat it, but they do sell some really good food on the side of the street. And a lot of the things that they sell on the side of the street are deep fried. In Sierra Leone, there's something that they call it fry, and it pretty much is just a whole plethora of different things that have been fried. You have fried plantains, different fried cakes is what they call them. There's rice cake and banana cake and I think even cassava cake, and it's pretty much just they form some sort of a dough out of rice flour or plantains or something like that, and they'll just fry this dough. So it kind of ends up kind of donut-y, but it's a lot more solid than you'd think of a donut. And they'll get just a whole bunch of fried things, and then they'll get some bread. I'll open up the bread and you put all these fried things in the bread, and they'll sometimes have like a sauce or a soup that you put on top of it. Really good, probably really fatty, but it tastes really good. And that was one of the first things my trainer introduced me to, because he's such a great trainer. But we on the side of the street, street vending is a very common thing there. They have people all over the place. They've set up little stands or a wheelbarrow that they have things in, or in Africa, of course, they carry things on their head. That's not just what you see in movies. That's what they do all the time there. Everything is carried on your head. And so some people they'll have a bunch of cassava up in a big bin on their head that they'll sell you, or some of these different kinds of cakes that they'll sell you, or fry that they'll sell you, or things like that. So it's easy to find food on the streets. So if you're trying to abstain from it completely, it's kind of tricky because it's the most easily available food. But I did get food poisoning once from something I ate. But you just have to be careful, I think, with some of the food you eat on the streets.